Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Nice to see you all again. Thanks for coming by. Today I want to address a fallacy about language learning. And I believe that as time goes by, there are probably fewer and fewer people who believe in this fallacy anyway. Language learning is changing a lot, I think, thanks to technology, the internet, YouTube, Skype, italki, all these different resources and pieces of technology at our disposal. However, there is a certain fallacy that you encounter sometimes, especially when you're dealing with very intellectual, academic sorts. And that is what I would like to address today. So, we have a peculiar fallacy to the effect that learning languages is fundamentally an academic endeavor. There are certain types of people who believe that if you want to learn a language and learn it properly and not just learn a few phrases out of a phrase book that you can't pronounce properly, then the best way to do it, maybe even the only way to do it, is to attend a really good academic program somewhere at a university where you will have serious language instruction. I don't know what the difference is between serious language instruction and non-serious language instruction, but we're going to have a think about that in this video. So let's talk about an academic endeavor or academic work, if you like. Academic work is fundamentally about the creation of new knowledge about the world and the various things, for lack of a better term, that exist in the world. If you get a PhD, and getting a PhD is basically accepted as a sign, maybe the sign, that you have come to be a researcher capable of doing independent research. If you get a PhD, what that means is that you have produced a piece of work that is considered to be a contribution to knowledge. This is the term that they tend to use when they talk about PhDs. You have to produce an original piece of knowledge that was obviously not known to anyone until you did your PhD. If you have not been capable of doing that, you will not be awarded your PhD. This is what it means to do research and to get a PhD. You have to make a contribution to knowledge. And if you want to be successful as a researcher in academia, you're going to have to go on making more and more contributions to knowledge. Well, if you stop and think about that for a moment, and yeah, I know there's a lot of stuff academics do at university, like drinking coffee and teaching students and marking things and mumbling and grumbling about all the marking they have to do. I'm not saying this is all academics do, but that is at the core of real academic work, right? If you stop and think about that definition of academic work, and I believe that most academics would accept it, if you stop and think about that definition, you can see that it is the very opposite of what you do when you learn a language. When you learn a language, you do not innovate. You do not create anything new. You do not create new grammatical structures and smuggle them into your target language when no one's looking. Yes, you can muck around with, puns and plays on words and stuff as you come to be a bit better at the language, but you are not fundamentally expanding or responsible for expanding the lexicon of the language. It is something that you learn. You're not supposed to be creating new bits of the lexicon, right? When you learn the pronunciation of the language, you learn to make the sounds that the native speakers already make. You're not supposed to be creating new phonemic distinctions or, introducing some sort of bilabial trill into the language when no one's looking. That's not how it works. Grammatically, lexically, in terms of pronunciation too, the conventions that you need to master already exist, and you're not supposed to be creating anything new, right? If you are creating new stuff, then you're not doing it right? Anything that you're doing that the native speakers never do is something that by definition exists outside of the scope of the language. It's not a part of the language. And if you're doing it, that means that you have made a mistake of some sort. So, language learning fundamentally is an incredibly conservative activity. That's a small c conservative, right? Not talking about politics here. It's an incredibly conservative undertaking in which you try to mimic what other people already do. And the more accurately you can mimic what other people, the natives, are already doing, the better that means you are at the language. Well, that is obviously not academic work, right? It cannot be academic work. You are deliberately not creating anything original. It is the opposite of academic work, in fact. Because languages are often taught at universities, not only at universities, of course, but because they're often taught at universities and taught at school, we tend to think of them as being academic subjects. But fundamentally, that is wrong. They are not academic subjects. When you study science or maths or geography or history or things like this at school, you're studying things that you can go on to do academic work in principle at university. But you cannot learn language academically because it's not an academic endeavor. What is it? Well, you are acquiring a set of skills when you learn a language. Most obviously, they are the ability to speak the language, to understand it in spoken form, to understand it in written form, perhaps to write it depending on the language and what sort of study you're doing, depending on what's important to you, right? You could break it down differently. You could say, well, you have to learn the grammar, consciously or subconsciously, explicitly or implicitly, you have to learn that, you have to learn the lexicon. But fundamentally, what you're doing is a bit like learning to be a chef or learning to be a pilot, right? Pilots generally are highly skilled people. They have learned to fly various different aircraft under various different conditions. That is a skill set. Being good at French is a skill set. Being good at Japanese is a skill set. Like I said a moment ago, you're basically trying to mimic what the natives do, albeit in a belated and imperfect fashion. You can't be good at a language by doing something outside of what the natives already do in it. So you might ask, well, why is it that languages are taught at universities at all then? You can't go to university to learn to be a chef. There will be culinary colleges where you can go and do that sort of thing, but it is not something that's taught at university. I mean, maybe it is these days. Universities are so different to what they used to be that maybe you can do a degree in being the next Gordon Ramsay. I think it's unlikely, even in Britain and America, where you can study virtually anything at university. Basically, these things are not studied at university. But despite the fact that it's not an academic endeavor, language learning is something that does take place at universities. Now, why is that? The first and most obvious reason is that there are very worthwhile and legitimate areas of academic endeavor that are only really possible if you have a certain ability with languages. If you want to do original research into Chinese, let's stick with China for a moment, in Chinese history, Chinese politics, Chinese culture, Chinese linguistics, obviously, Chinese anything, then you're going to have to be pretty good at Chinese. That's how you access China. In the broadest possible sense of the term, that's how you access China. So languages are crucial as a gateway to doing serious academic work in certain fields. If you want to be some sort of academic specialist on China, then you're going to have to learn Chinese. And that means that universities are going to have to teach it if they want people to engage in that sort of academic work. That is the first reason that languages are taught at university. The second reason, I suppose, that languages are taught at university is that, despite the fact that language study is not academic work, it can be just as hard, just as demanding, really, as any other type of cognitive work. It's a type of cognitive work, even if it's not a type of academic work. And cognitively, it can be as taxing, as demanding as just about any other type of work. That means that if you want to get good at languages, then you're going to have to spend a lot of time working on them, and you're going to be performing at the same sort of level intellectually as other people who are doing real academic work around you. And it makes sense, therefore, that they should be studied at universities, amongst other places, of course. I have a degree in Japanese studies. I've got degrees in other things too, but I have a degree in Japanese studies. And because I was much more interested in the language than in anything else when I was doing my course, I would say that probably 65-70% of what I did at university, time-wise, was focused on learning or translating or dealing with, in some sense, Japanese. And it was only years later that it occurred to me that actually my degree at university was very different to the degrees of most of the other people around me. I wasn't really doing academic work. I was doing the linguistic equivalent of learning to be a baker, or I don't know, a pastry chef, or an expert on sushi making or something like that. I was acquiring skills, not doing academic work. Anyway, I'm making this video because, although like I said, this idea is probably dying out, largely because of the internet, there are still people who insist on believing that language learning, especially with exotic or alien languages, is fundamentally an academic endeavor, and that if you want to do it properly, you should do it in an academic environment. Those environments work for some people, but the idea that those are the best places to learn languages is mistaken. And when you bear in mind how much it costs to study at university in Western countries, you really want to think hard, very hard, about this idea that learning languages is an academic matter. It's not. You don't have to do it at university, and other ways of learning languages have their own advantages, which are probably greater now than the advantages of studying at university, in fact. So think very hard about that. A reasonably intelligent 15-year-old native speaker of the language that you're learning has all sorts of advantages over a non-native professor who's going to explain the language to you. I do teach foreign languages. I've written books on Japanese grammar. I think that I have things to offer people who are interested in learning Japanese. But firstly, that doesn't alter the observation that learning languages is fundamentally non-academic. And secondly, it has to be acknowledged that a fairly randomly selected 15-year-old native speaker of the language in question has all sorts of advantages that I will never be able to match. They can provide you with a native pronunciation model. They can provide you with native grammaticality judgments. They have a native understanding of what works idiomatically and what doesn't in the language in question. If they can speak your language and you can ask them questions about how to say this, how to say that, and if they can answer those questions, giving you the pieces of language that you need, then depending on the degree of aptitude that you have, you might not need that much else to learn your target language. Just having somebody tell you how to say something correctly, just having somebody write it down for you so you don't lose it, so you can retain it, so you can put it into your Anki decks or whatever you use, that's incredibly powerful. And the idea that only highly educated and qualified professors at a university can help you with this stuff is completely farcical, ultimately. And bear in mind that I say that as someone who's gone through this process at university, and I say it as someone who teaches English, yes, but foreign languages too. Anyway, I don't know whether this video has been of any interest to anyone. Certainly, I think the number of people who think that language learning is fundamentally an academic matter is declining every day. But who knows? It's interesting to think about it, and it's interesting to consider the fact that language learning is taught at universities at all. Fundamentally, it's not academic. You don't create anything new, and that means that it can't be academic work when all's said and done. Linguistics is another matter. If you're doing original work in linguistics, that's something else, but that is an entirely separate matter. Working in linguistics and studying foreign languages are not at all the same thing. Anyway, I've been rambling on a bit, but I think it's time to go. So thanks very much for listening. Feel free to let me know in the comments if there's anything you want to say, and I will see you next time. Ciao, ciao, bye-bye.